You'll pay for this. I own this community, and I own you. This isn't over." Her voice was a shriek, a ragged tear in the stunned silence of the community clubhouse. It echoed off the cheap wood-paneled walls, a final, impotent threat from a queen whose castle had just been publicly dismantled. Two police officers, looking profoundly bored with her hysterics, were securing her hands behind her back with a definitive, plastic click. The sound was the most satisfying thing I had heard in months. I just stood there, hands in my pockets, and watched her go. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just watched, feeling the quiet, solid satisfaction of a support beam settling perfectly into place. This wasn't a victory I had sought, but it was a victory I had meticulously engineered. It all started 6 months earlier, with a patch of dirt and the misplaced belief that rules were meant to be reasonable. After my wife, Sarah, passed away, the world lost its color. Our trendy downtown condo, once a vibrant hub of dinner parties and laughter, became a gray, silent box full of ghosts. Every corner held a memory that ambushed me, every object a story that left me hollow. I needed a change, a place where the foundations were solid, where the memories were older and gentler. So, I came home. Home was the house my grandfather built on the outskirts of what was once a quiet town. It was a sturdy, 2-story craftsman, full of thick oak trim and floors that groaned with the wisdom of generations. He had planted the massive oak tree in the backyard the day my father was born. I had learned to climb on its branches and proposed to Sarah under its sprawling canopy. The house wasn't just wood and nails, it was my family's tangible history, a legacy I was now tasked with preserving. I was a structural engineer. I spent my days analyzing stress points, calculating load-bearing capacities, and understanding how systems held together or fell apart. I appreciated order, logic, and things that were built to last. This house was the epitome of that. The problem was that over the years, the quiet town had metastasized. Subdivisions had sprouted like fungus after a rain, and one of them, Maple Creek Estates, had wrapped itself around my family's property like a well-manicured python. My grandfather had refused to sell, so my half-acre plot remained an island of old-world character in a sea of beige siding and identical, soulless mailboxes. When my father passed it to me, he had been grudgingly absorbed into their homeowners association as a condition of getting city utilities extended. It was a deal made with the devil, a ticking time bomb I had just inherited. I was seeking peace, not a fight. I paid my dues, kept my lawn mowed, and planned to spend my days slowly repairing the old house and, hopefully, myself. I wanted to be left alone. But in a place like Maple Creek Estates, being left alone was not an option. The community was ruled by a woman named Brenda. I first saw her in action a week after I moved in. I was on my porch, drinking coffee, when I saw her marching down the sidewalk, a clipboard clutched to her chest like a holy text. She stopped at my neighbor's house, a young family with a couple of kids. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger at a small, colorful plastic slide in their front yard. I was too far away to hear the words, but the body language was a universal language of bureaucratic tyranny. Her posture was rigid, her gestures sharp and accusatory. The young father, a guy named Tom, looked bewildered, then frustrated, then finally, defeated. He dragged the offending piece of brightly colored plastic into his garage while Brenda made a triumphant tick mark on her clipboard and marched on. She was the HOA president, a title she wielded with the gravity of a Roman emperor. She was a woman in her mid-50s with a helmet of blonde hair that looked like it could deflect small arms fire and a perpetual expression that suggested she had just smelled something unpleasant. Power didn't just corrupt her, it was her lifeblood. The HOA was her tiny, perfect kingdom, and she was its absolute monarch. My first direct interaction with her came a month later, at the quarterly HOA meeting. It was held in the community clubhouse, a sterile room that smelled of air freshener and quiet desperation. The main topic on the agenda was the new community pool. Brenda stood at a podium, clicking through a PowerPoint presentation filled with garish artist renderings of a kidney-shaped pool surrounded by unnaturally happy, stock photo families. And, she announced with a grand flourish, the board has approved the perfect location. The unused community plot right at the end of Oak Lane. A map flashed onto the screen. My stomach tightened. The unused community plot was a narrow strip of grass that ran directly along my property line, right next to my grandfather's oak tree. The renderings showed the pool's concrete deck coming within inches of my fence. I waited for a pause, then raised my hand. "Excuse me," I said, my voice calm. "I have a question about the location." Brenda's eyes found me, and a flicker of annoyance crossed her face. She didn't like questions. They were flaws in the perfect concrete of her authority. "Yes," she asked, her tone dripping with condescension, as if addressing a slow child. "That's directly adjacent to my property," I explained. "I'm concerned about the noise, the lack of privacy, and the potential impact on the root system of that large oak tree. It's very old." She gave a thin, dismissive smile. "All of that has been taken into consideration. The community's needs must come first. We need this pool for property values." She looked around the room for support. "Surely you wouldn't want to stand in the way of progress and higher property values for everyone, would you, Mr. Mark?" I supplied. "And it's not about standing in the way of progress. It's about being a good neighbor. A pool less than 20 feet from my back porch seems unreasonable." "Your concerns are noted," she said, the words a verbal pat on the head. She clicked to the next slide, a budget breakdown. The discussion was over. I had been dismissed. I left that meeting with a knot of unease in my gut. It was the feeling an engineer gets when they see a hairline crack in a critical support column. Something was wrong with the structure of this place, and I had a feeling the stress was only going to increase. I was right. A few weeks later, the bulldozers arrived. The noise was the first assault, a grinding, earth-shaking roar that started at 7 in the morning and didn't stop until dusk. My peaceful sanctuary was now a construction zone. The ground vibrated, dust coated my windows, and the air was filled with the shouts of workers and the incessant beeping of reversing trucks. I tried to be patient. I was an engineer, I understood that construction was a messy, disruptive process. But the crew was sloppy. Their debris spilled into my yard. A discarded energy drink can landed in my wife's rose bushes. I picked it up and threw it away, biting back my irritation. After a week of this, I sent a polite, formal email to the HOA board, with photos, simply requesting that they ensure the construction crew respected the property boundaries and cleaned up after themselves. It was a reasonable request from a reasonable man. The response I got was not an email. It was a letter, hand-delivered and stuck to my front door with a piece of tape. It was an official HOA notice of violation. My heart hammered against my ribs as I read it. The violation: failure to maintain aesthetic standards. Brenda had cited a small patch of peeling paint on my back fence, a section not even visible from the street. The letter included a demand for immediate remediation and a $50 fine. It was so transparently retaliatory it was almost comical. She couldn't address my legitimate complaint, so she attacked me instead. It was the classic bully tactic: when challenged, create a distraction by punching down. I paid the fine and painted the fence. I wanted to see how this would play out. I was testing the system, applying a small amount of pressure to see where the weak points were. 2 days after I painted the fence, a second violation notice appeared. This one was for a hairline crack in my driveway. It was a crack that had been there since my father poured the concrete 30 years ago, a tiny flaw that was now, apparently, an existential threat to the neighborhood's pristine character. Another $50 fine. This was no longer about a fence or a driveway. This was a message. Brenda was telling me to shut up and get in line. She was trying to bury me under a pile of petty paperwork and fines, hoping I would either give up or move out. The harassment escalated online. On the official Maple Creek Estates community Facebook page, a new post appeared from Brenda. She didn't use my name, but the target was unmistakable. "It has come to the board's attention," she wrote, "that certain long-time residents may not be familiar with the community standards we all agree to uphold. While we respect history, we cannot allow one person's reluctance to modernize to drag down the property values for everyone else. Progress is coming, and we must all embrace it." The comments section lit up. People, many of whom I'd never even met, chimed in. "Tell Brenda. Some people are just so selfish. If you don't like the rules, move." I felt a cold anger coiling in my stomach. She was turning my neighbors against me, painting me as some kind of villain for simply wanting the quiet enjoyment of the home my family had owned for 70 years. She was using the community as her personal army. I tried one last time to be the voice of reason. I documented the driveway crack with a tape measure, took photos, and found the HOA bylaw she was citing. It was a vague clause about maintaining surfaces in good repair. I wrote another formal letter, arguing that a non-structural, quarter-inch hairline crack did not constitute a state of disrepair and that her targeted enforcement was discriminatory. Her response was to double the fine for failure to comply in a timely manner and add a new violation for my mailbox, which she claimed was leaning half a degree off-center. I was documenting everything, creating a file that was growing thicker by the day. The engineer in me was building a case, collecting data points, analyzing the structural flaws in her campaign of harassment. But the man in me, the grieving husband who just wanted to be left alone, was getting tired. Then came the day it all changed. The day the fight became personal. The day they hurt the tree. I was in my office, trying to work, when I heard a sickening crack, followed by a splintering groan. It was a sound I knew well from demolition sites, the sound of something old and strong finally giving way. I ran to the back window. A large branch from my grandfather's oak tree lay on the ground, its green leaves trembling in the dust. The end of the branch was a jagged, splintered mess. Standing beside it was a backhoe, its metal bucket looking like a guilty chin. The operator was looking up at the tree, then back at his machine, a stupid look of surprise on his face. I was out the back door in a second, my feet pounding on the grass. "What did you do?" I yelled, my voice shaking with a rage I hadn't felt in years. The foreman, a beefy man with a sunburned neck, sauntered over. "Whoa there, buddy. Calm down. Accident." "An accident?" I pointed at the mangled branch. "You just took out a 50-year-old limb from that tree. Were you even paying attention?" "Look," he said, holding up his hands. "Your tree is hanging over the property line. Technically, it's encroaching. We were just clearing the way for the rebar forms. It's in our way." Before I could respond, a car door slammed. Brenda was marching across the churned-up dirt, her face a mask of grim satisfaction. She had been called to the scene like a vulture to a fresh kill. "Is there a problem here?" she asked, her voice syrupy sweet. "Your crew just damaged my tree," I said, my voice tight. "A very old, very important tree." She glanced at the fallen branch, then at me, and shrugged. "Well, as the foreman said, it was hanging over community property. We have every right to trim back anything that encroaches. Frankly, you should be thanking us for the free pruning. That tree is probably a violation of the canopy height ordinance anyway." That was it. That was the moment. Her casual, dismissive cruelty. The way she twisted the situation, turning their negligence into my fault. The way she dismissed a living piece of my family's history as a mere ordinance violation. Something inside me shifted. The part of me that was willing to be reasonable, to compromise, to seek a peaceful solution, it just switched off. It was like watching a load-bearing wall fail in slow motion. The crack spread, the structure groaned, and then the whole thing collapsed into dust, leaving something harder and colder in its place. She thought this was a game of fines and Facebook posts. She had no idea who she was dealing with. She wasn't fighting a grieving homeowner anymore. She was fighting a structural engineer. And I was going to take her little kingdom apart, piece by piece, starting with the foundations. I looked from her smug face to the wounded tree, and then I turned and walked back into my house without another word. The time for talking was over. The time for planning had begun. That evening, I didn't mourn or rage. I worked. I went down into the basement and found the metal tube that held my family's old documents. I carefully unrolled the original property survey from 1952, the one my grandfather had commissioned when he bought the land. The paper was brittle, the ink faded, but the lines were clear and precise. I found the old iron pin marker described in the survey, still buried in the corner of my yard, hidden under a thick azalea bush. The next morning, I was at the county records office. I spent hours poring over dusty plat maps and zoning documents. I pulled every file related to the Maple Creek Estates development. I was looking for a flaw, a discrepancy, a single misplaced line that I could exploit. An engineer knows that the biggest collapses often start with the smallest errors. And then I found it. It was in the original developer's master plan from the late 80s. The map was a cheap photocopy, slightly skewed. When I compared it to my grandfather's certified survey, I saw the error. The developer's map, the one the HOA had been using as their Bible for 30 years, had shifted the property line between my lot and the community land. It cut off a 10-foot wide slice of my backyard along its entire length. My heart began to beat a steady, heavy rhythm like a pile driver. The land the pool was being built on, the concrete deck, the plumbing trenches, and what was going to be the entire shallow end, was not community property. It was mine. I made high-resolution copies of everything. The old survey, the developer's flawed map, the county's official plat record. The evidence was irrefutable. The HOA's entire project was based on a 30-year-old mistake. They were building their glorious monument to property values on my land. I went home and sat at my drafting table, the documents spread out before me like a battle plan. This was no longer just about stopping a pool. This was about justice. Brenda had pushed me, harassed me, and damaged my legacy. Now, I was going to use her own ignorance and arrogance to tear her down. My plan formed in my mind with the cool, calculated clarity of a blueprint. It would be a multi-phase operation. A controlled demolition of Brenda's authority. Phase 1 was confirmation. I needed a new, legally binding survey. Not to prove it to myself, but to create an irrefutable legal weapon. I called a highly rated surveying firm and scheduled them to come out the following week. I specifically requested they use the original county plat records as their primary reference. Phase 2 was baiting the trap. I knew Brenda's personality. She was arrogant, impulsive, and utterly convinced of her own righteousness. When the new survey markers appeared on her land, she wouldn't react with caution. She would react with outrage. I needed to be ready to document that outrage. I ordered 2 high-resolution, motion-activated security cameras, small enough to be concealed in the foliage of the bushes along my property line. Phase 3 was the execution. A quiet, legal maneuver first, followed by a public detonation that would shatter her credibility and expose her incompetence to the entire community she ruled with an iron fist. I felt a grim satisfaction settle over me. The grief that had clouded my mind for months began to recede, replaced by a sharp, focused purpose. Brenda thought she was fighting over bylaws and fence paint. She had no idea I was about to hit her with a seismic event. She was living in a house of cards built on a faulty foundation, and I was about to kick out the cornerstone. My neighbor, Frank, a retired police detective with a sharp mind and an even sharper wit, saw me installing the cameras one afternoon. He ambled over to the fence, his old German shepherd, Buster, trotting at his heels. "Putting in a little extra security, Mark?" he asked, his eyes twinkling. He'd heard about my run-ins with Brenda. In a neighborhood like this, gossip traveled faster than light. "Something like that," I said, adjusting the angle of a camera to get a perfect view of the construction site and the disputed strip of land. "Just documenting the ongoing landscaping project." Frank chuckled. "Brenda's landscaping. That woman would landscape a desert with concrete if the bylaws told her to. What are you really up to?" I trusted Frank. He was old school, a man who understood rules but had no patience for fools who abused them. I decided to bring him into the loop. I invited him inside and laid the maps out on my dining room table. He whistled softly as I pointed out the discrepancy. "Well, I'll be," he said, leaning in for a closer look. "She's building her swimming pool in your backyard." "A portion of it, yes," I confirmed. "And these cameras? I have a feeling our dear HOA president won't take kindly to the new survey markers when they go in. I want to have a record of her reaction." Frank grinned, a slow, wolfish grin. "Son, I spent 30 years as a detective. Let me give you some free advice. Make sure your timestamp is accurate. And check the state laws on audio recording. You want this to be clean. You want it to be admissible." I had already checked. Our state was a one-party consent state for audio recording. As long as I was a party to the conversation, or it was happening on my property where there was no expectation of privacy, I was in the clear. Frank's advice was a good reminder to be meticulous. Every detail had to be perfect. This project had to be engineered with zero tolerance for error. A week later, the surveyors arrived. They were efficient and professional, using GPS and laser transits to map out the property lines with millimeter precision. They worked for a few hours, and when they were done, a series of bright pink flags on thin metal stakes marched across the lawn, and 2 new, permanent iron pins were driven into the ground at the corners. The result was exactly what I expected, and it was beautiful. The new, legally certified property line ran a full 10 feet past my back fence. The line of pink flags cut directly across the new concrete pool deck they had just poured. It sliced off the corner of the shallow end, right where the steps were supposed to go. The trap was set. The bait was laid. Now, I just had to wait for the quarry to walk into it. I didn't have to wait long. The next morning, I was reviewing the camera footage from my office computer. I watched as the construction crew arrived, saw the flags, and stopped in confusion. The foreman walked the line of flags, scratching his head. He made a phone call. 20 minutes later, Brenda's white SUV screeched to a halt at the curb. She got out, slamming the door, and marched onto the site, her face a thundercloud. The foreman pointed at the flags, and I saw her head snap in the direction of my house. Then, she started walking. She didn't hesitate at the old, perceived property line. She stormed right past it, onto my land, and began yanking the pink flags out of the ground with vicious tugs. She wasn't just removing them, she was destroying them, bending the thin metal stakes over her knee before throwing them in a pile. I turned up the volume on the camera's audio feed. Her voice was sharp and clear. "This is harassment," she shrieked at the foreman, who was watching her with a mixture of fear and awe. "He thinks he can intimidate me with this garbage. This is community property. I'll see him in court. I'll see him in jail." She tore out the last flag, the one marking the corner where the new iron pin was. Then, she marched over to my fence and threw the mangled bundle of metal and plastic into my yard, where they landed with a clatter in my wife's rose bushes. My camera, hidden in the leaves of a nearby magnolia tree, captured it all in crystal clear high definition. Her face, contorted with rage. Her words, laced with venom. The act of trespassing onto my property. The act of destroying the survey markers, a legally protected instrument. I saved the video file to 3 separate hard drives. I had her. The fish had not only taken the bait, it had jumped into the boat and started flopping around on the deck. I didn't confront her. I didn't yell or even go outside. An engineer doesn't argue with a failing structure, they document the failure and then condemn the building. I spent the rest of the day drafting a letter. It was a masterpiece of calm, professional language. It was addressed to the entire HOA board, not just Brenda. "Dear board members," it began. "It has come to my attention that the current construction of the community pool is encroaching on my private property. Attached, you will find a copy of a new, certified survey of my property, conducted by a licensed state surveyor, confirming this encroachment." I continued, "Furthermore, on the morning of October 5th, at approximately 9:15 a.m., HOA President Brenda stormed onto my property without permission and willfully destroyed the legally placed survey markers. This act of trespassing and destruction of property was captured on video. An invoice for the replacement of the damaged survey markers is attached. I trust the board will take immediate action to halt construction and remedy this situation. I look forward to your prompt response." I printed the letter, the survey, and the invoice. I put them in a large manila envelope and sent it via certified mail with return receipt requested. There would be a legal record that they received it. There would be no plausible deniability. The ball was in their court. I leaned back in my chair and watched the live feed from my cameras. The construction crew, under Brenda's furious direction, had resumed work, pointedly ignoring the area where the flags had been. They were pouring concrete on my land. Every bag they mixed, every yard they poured, was just making my legal case stronger. They weren't just building a pool, they were digging their own grave. The certified mail receipt came back signed 3 days later. A day after that, my phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. "Hello. Is this Mark?" The voice was a man's, nervous and reedy. I recognized him as one of the board members from the meeting, a quiet man named George who always seemed to be shrinking in Brenda's presence. "It is," I said. "George from the HOA board," he stammered. We received your letter. The board is reviewing the situation." "Reviewing?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "It seems fairly straightforward. You're building on my land. Your president trespassed and destroyed my property. The only thing to review is how you're going to fix it. Yes, well, Brenda says the survey is a fake, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. She says you're trying to extort the community. And do you believe that, George? I asked. Do you believe a state-licensed surveyor would risk their career to forge a document for me? Do you believe the county plat maps are also forgeries? There was a long pause. Brenda has called an emergency community meeting for tomorrow night, he finally said. She wants to address this publicly. Excellent, I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. I'll be there. This was even better than I had hoped. I thought I would have to fight them behind closed doors, in lawyers' offices. But Brenda, in her infinite arrogance, was handing me a public stage. She was so convinced of her own power that she believed she could win this battle with sheer force of will and public shaming. She was about to learn a very hard lesson about the difference between force and structural integrity. The clubhouse was packed. Word had clearly gotten out that there was going to be drama. The air was thick with anticipation and the scent of burnt coffee. I saw Frank near the back, and he gave me a subtle nod. I took a seat in the front row. I wanted a clear view. Brenda stood at the podium, her face set in a mask of righteous indignation. She began by painting a picture of a community under attack. She spoke of outside forces and selfish individuals trying to sabotage the beautiful new pool that was being built for the good of all. Then, she turned her attention to me. She didn't use my name, but she pointed a trembling finger in my direction. One individual, she spat, has decided to hold our community hostage. He has produced fraudulent documents, a fake survey, in an attempt to extort money from this HOA. He is trying to steal this land from you, from your children, who deserve a place to swim and play. A murmur went through the crowd. People were looking at me, their expressions a mixture of confusion and hostility. Brenda was good at this. She knew how to whip up a mob. Here, she said, tapping a projector screen behind her. An image of the old, skewed developer's map appeared. This is the official map of our community. It has been for 30 years. It clearly shows that the land is ours. She looked at me, a triumphant smirk on her face. Do you have anything to say for yourself? Do you want to admit to this community that you are trying to defraud them? The room was silent. All eyes were on me. This was the moment she had engineered for my public humiliation. I stood up slowly. I wasn't carrying a folder of papers. I wasn't holding a microphone. I just stood there and looked at her. Brenda, I said, my voice calm and carrying easily in the quiet room. You're right about one thing. That map has been the one you've used for 30 years. And for 30 years, it's been wrong. I turned to the audience. My family has owned my property since before this HOA existed. I have the original, certified survey from 1952. More importantly, the official plat map on file with the county, the legally binding document, confirms that survey. The land is mine. Brenda laughed, a shrill, ugly sound. Lies. Forgeries. He's trying to confuse you with technical jargon. It's not jargon, it's a fact, I said. A fact you could have easily verified with a simple trip to the county records office. Or by hiring a competent surveyor before you spent hundreds of thousands of dollars of the community's money. I paused, letting that sink in. But that's a simple matter of property law. What's more concerning, and less debatable, is your own behavior. 2 days ago, you trespassed onto my property, and you destroyed my survey markers. And I have a question for all of you. I looked around the room, making eye contact with my neighbors. Is that the kind of leader you want? Someone who responds to a legal dispute not with evidence or discussion, but by breaking the law herself. Brenda's face was turning a blotchy red. That's a lie. I never set foot on your property. Is it? I asked softly. That's a very bold claim. A claim that is very easily disproven. I didn't need to show the video. Not yet. The seed of doubt was planted. Her absolute denial, in the face of my calm certainty, made her look unhinged. George, the nervous board member, was looking at his shoes. The rest of the board looked deeply uncomfortable. The community was no longer looking at me with hostility, but with a dawning sense of uncertainty. The trap had been sprung. Her credibility was now bleeding out on the floor of the clubhouse. But she wasn't done yet. Cornered animals are the most dangerous. Her next move was to abandon all pretense of civility and go straight for the jugular. The day after the meeting, my phone rang. It was my boss, the head of the engineering firm where I worked. His tone was grave. "Mark, I just got a very disturbing call," he said. "From a woman named Brenda, the president of your HOA." My blood ran cold. "What did she say?" "She said you've been harassing her, that you're unstable. She claimed you made threats against her and her family. She said she was concerned about your mental state and that maybe you shouldn't be responsible for designing buildings that people work and live in." I closed my eyes. This was a new level of viciousness. She wasn't just attacking my home now, she was attacking my livelihood, my professional reputation, the very foundation of my identity. She was trying to ruin me. "It's all lies," I said, my voice tight with controlled fury. "It's a retaliation tactic because of a property dispute." "I figured as much," my boss said, to my immense relief. "You've been with us for 15 years, Mark. Your work is impeccable." I told her that if she had a legitimate complaint, she should file it with the police, not us. "But you need to be careful. Accusations like that, even if they're baseless, can stick." He was right. Brenda was trying to paint me as a monster, a crazy person, so that no one would listen to my claims about the property line. It was a scorched earth tactic. The next day, a police car pulled into my driveway. 2 officers got out and walked to my door. My heart pounded. She had actually done it. She had filed a false report. I invited them in, offered them coffee, and calmly explained my side of the story. I showed them the certified survey and the letters I had sent to the HOA. I told them about the cameras I had installed. "She claims you threatened her at the community meeting," one of the officers said, studying my face. "I have an audio recording of the entire meeting," I replied without blinking. "As well as video of her trespassing on my property and destroying my survey stakes. Would you like to see it?" The officer's expression changed. He and his partner exchanged a look. They knew a frivolous, retaliatory complaint when they saw one. They had probably dealt with Brenda before. "That might not be necessary right now," he said. "But keep that footage safe. It sounds like you're doing everything by the book. Just try to avoid any direct contact with her." They left, and I was left shaking, not with fear, but with a white-hot rage. She had crossed a line. A final line. My desire for quiet, poetic justice was now hardening into a need for total, unequivocal annihilation. She didn't want to just win, she wanted to destroy me. She had miscalculated. She had turned a strategic disagreement into a war of survival, and she had no idea how well-armed I was. That evening, as I was compiling my evidence for a lawsuit, an email popped up in my inbox. The subject line was just one word: Brenda. The sender was an unfamiliar name. I opened it cautiously. "Mr. Mark," the email began. "My name is Carol. I was the treasurer for the Maple Creek HOA for 2 years. I resigned 6 months ago because I could no longer be complicit in Brenda's activities. I was at the meeting the other night. I saw what you did, and I saw how she's trying to ruin you. She has to be stopped. I think I have something that can help you." Attached to the email was a password-protected zip file. A second email arrived a moment later with the password, "Justice." I downloaded the file and typed in the password. It opened to reveal a folder full of spreadsheets, scanned invoices, and bank statements. It was the HOA's financial records for the last 3 years. I was an engineer, not an accountant, but I knew how to read numbers and follow a trail. And the trail I saw was breathtaking in its audacity. Brenda hadn't just been a power-hungry tyrant. She had been a thief. The records showed a pattern of embezzlement and fraud. She had been padding expenses, creating phantom vendors, and funneling money into a shell corporation. The pool project was her masterpiece. The construction contract had been awarded, without a competitive bid, to a company called Apex Construction. A quick search online revealed that the owner of Apex Construction was Brenda's brother-in-law. The contract was inflated by at least 40%. There were invoices for materials that were never delivered, for labor hours that were never worked. The HOA was paying for a premium pool, but the shoddy work and corner cutting, like not bothering with a proper survey, showed they were getting a bargain basement job. The difference was going straight into her pocket. This was the final piece. The keystone. My property dispute had inadvertently uncovered a massive criminal enterprise. The reason she fought so hard, so viciously, wasn't just about ego. It was about protecting her cash cow. The pool had to be built on that exact spot, with that exact contractor, because the whole scheme depended on it. I suddenly understood. Her rage wasn't the rage of a petty tyrant being challenged. It was the panic of a criminal on the verge of being exposed. I picked up the phone and called Frank. "Frank," I said, my voice low and steady. "I need that contact you mentioned in the Economic Crimes Unit. I think our little HOA problem just went from a civil matter to a felony." The next 48 hours were a whirlwind of quiet, methodical activity. I met with a detective Frank knew, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Detective Miller. I laid out everything on her desk, the property surveys, the video of Brenda, the audio from the meeting, the false police report, and Carol's folder of financial documents. She listened intently, her expression growing more serious with each piece of evidence I presented. When I finished, she looked at the pile of evidence, then back at me. "Mr. Mark," she said, "you've done most of our work for us. This is one of the cleanest cases I've ever seen." She explained that they would begin a formal investigation immediately. They would subpoena the full bank records and start interviewing former board members, like Carol. She advised me to proceed with my civil suit to reclaim my land, as it would keep the pressure on Brenda and the HOA while the criminal case was being built. "Let them focus on the land," she said with a thin smile. "They won't see the other thing coming." I hired a lawyer, a sharp real estate litigator, who was practically salivating when he saw my evidence file. He filed an immediate injunction to halt all construction on the pool, citing the irrefutable survey data. The court granted the injunction a day later. A sheriff's deputy served the stop work order at the construction site. The entire project ground to a halt. The news spread through the neighborhood like a wildfire. An emergency HOA meeting was called, not by Brenda this time, but by a petition signed by dozens of panicked homeowners who were now facing a half-built, legally contested money pit in their community. This was it. The final showdown. The stage was set in the same clubhouse where Brenda had tried to humiliate me. But this time, the atmosphere was different. There was no hostility directed at me. There was only fear, confusion, and a rising tide of anger directed at the woman at the podium. Brenda tried to control the narrative. She blamed me, the litigious troublemaker, for the delays and the mounting legal fees. She portrayed herself as the victim, a dedicated community servant being persecuted by a selfish man. But her performance was strained. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a brittle, desperate edge. She could feel the ground shifting beneath her feet. When she finished her tirade, I stood up. My lawyer had advised me to let him do the talking, but I knew I had to do this myself. I walked to the front of the room with a laptop and a small projector. "Good evening," I said, my voice calm and clear. "I know you're all worried. You have a right to be. You've been lied to. Not just about a property line, but about your money." I projected the certified survey map onto the screen. The red line of my property cut cleanly through the diagram of the pool. This is not my opinion. This is a legal fact. The HOA has been building on my land. This entire project was based on a foundation of incompetence. Then, I played the video. The room was silent as they watched their president, in crystal clear high definition, storm onto my property, destroy the survey stakes, and shriek about how she would see me in jail. I saw jaws drop. I saw people shaking their heads in disbelief. George, the board member, looked like he was about to be sick. "This is how your president responds to a legal disagreement," I said, pausing the video on a freeze frame of her enraged face. "Not with facts, but with trespassing and criminal destruction of property. Is this leadership?" A man in the back shouted, "No." Another one yelled, "Where's our money going, Brenda?" Brenda was sputtering. "He's twisting things. The video is doctored. He's a liar." "Am I?" I asked softly. "Let's talk about the money. Let's talk about the contract for this pool." A contract awarded without a single competing bid to a company called Apex Construction. I clicked to the next image on the screen. It was a corporate registration document for Apex Construction. The owner's name was clearly listed, David Miller. And who is David Miller? I asked the room. He's Brenda's brother-in-law. A collective gasp went through the crowd. This entire project, I continued, my voice like a hammer driving a nail, was a scheme to defraud this community. To funnel your dues, your hard-earned money, into her own family's pockets. The contract was inflated by almost $500,000. Brenda finally broke. Her composure shattered like cheap glass. Lies. All lies, she screamed, her voice cracking. I did it for you. All of you. I built this community. I made it what it is. That money was for expenses. You have no idea how much work it is. The time I put in. In her panicked, rambling confession, she was admitting everything. She was incriminating herself in front of 50 witnesses. And that's when the back doors of the clubhouse opened. Detective Miller and another plainclothes officer walked in. They moved through the stunned crowd with a quiet purpose. They didn't look at me. They walked directly to the podium where Brenda was still babbling hysterically. Brenda, Detective Miller said, her voice calm but firm. You're under arrest for embezzlement, wire fraud, and conspiracy. The room fell into a dead silence, broken only by Brenda's pathetic whimper. It was the sound of a collapsed structure finally settling into rubble. As they cuffed her, her eyes found mine across the room. They were filled with a venomous, bottomless hatred. You'll pay for this, she shrieked, the sound ragged and torn. I own this community, and I own you. This isn't over. But it was. She just didn't know it yet. I watched them lead her out, a queen-being frog marched out of her own fallen castle. I felt no joy, no triumph. Just a profound sense of quiet. The storm had finally passed. The aftermath was messy, but cathartic. The HOA was thrown into receivership. The old board resigned in disgrace. A forensic audit revealed the true extent of Brenda's theft. It was even worse than Carol had suspected. She had been stealing from the community for nearly a decade. Brenda and her brother-in-law were both convicted. The judge, citing the brazenness of the crime and her complete lack of remorse, sentenced her to 7 years in state prison. She was ordered to pay full restitution, which meant she lost everything. Her house, her savings, her car. Her perfect little kingdom had been repossessed. A new board was elected, led by Tom, the young father I'd seen her berating over a plastic slide. They were reasonable people who were more interested in building a community than an empire. Their first official act was to issue a formal, public apology to me. We settled the lawsuit amicably. The HOA paid for the demolition of the encroaching sections of the pool deck and structure. They paid for my legal fees and for the damage to my property. And, as a gesture of goodwill, they paid to have a beautiful new cedar fence built for me, right on the newly, and correctly, established property line. I never wanted to be a hero. I never wanted to be a fighter. I was just a man who wanted to be left alone in the house his grandfather built. But Brenda, in her arrogance, had forced my hand. She had mistaken my quiet grief for weakness, my desire for peace as an opportunity for exploitation. She learned the hard way that even the quietest man will fight when you threaten the foundations of his life. Sometimes, when I'm sitting in my backyard now, under the shade of the great oak tree, I look at that new fence. It's strong and straight, a clear and definite line. It's a symbol of peace, but also a reminder. A reminder that peace sometimes has to be fought for. That bullies only have the power you give them. And that sometimes, the most satisfying project an engineer can undertake is the controlled demolition of a tyrant's reign. The quiet has returned to my home, deeper and more meaningful than before. My legacy is secure. And I am finally at peace.